Kendrick Lamar dropped a new album today on November 22nd, 2024. This isn't going to be a review for it. I'm just going to sort of list some of my thoughts. I'm a fan of Kendrick. I have been for a long time. I really liked this album. I liked it more than his last album. His last album felt a little bit wandering. Some really incredible work on that album. This one felt a little bit more coherent. It also felt like he was just, he's riding a wave of intrigue about what he has to say at the moment. Obviously, he's controversial. Not everybody likes, what he did during his beef with Drake, but I think it's relatively unanimous that he won, or at least he had the better showing during that beef. Most people understand him to be the winner. Some people don't, but whatever, you're always going to have that. So I think that he's just in a position right now in his career where people are more interested in what he had to say and want to hear more about what he has to say about this whole conflict, about everything that happened. And I think he delivered on that. He spoke a lot about people's reactions, people that he trusted and what their reactions were, people like Snoop Dogg and Lil Wayne, and how the same reactions that they had to the beef, or when Snoop Dogg posted the tailor-made freestyle, when Lil Wayne was apparently upset about the Super Bowl performance that Kendrick's going to be doing, and we all sort of reacted to these things in real time. Kendrick gave us his thoughts on those same things, and so it's interesting to hear. And I think, the main thing that people are going to take away and seem to already be taken away from this album is that he's on demon time. He seems ready to go to war. It's the most militant he's ever sounded. He's had songs on his projects before where he expresses this kind of militance. I'm reminded of Triple X and DNA off of Damn. Pretty similar tone to those songs that he's striking all across this album. But it just feels a lot more dialed in, and it feels like Kendrick has spent a lot of time thinking about what it is that he dislikes and disapproves of about current hip-hop culture. And he also seems to have spent some time thinking about what he's going to do about it. And, the thing that comes to mind for me when it comes to some of these critiques, there's a lot of things that come to mind. In many ways, I agree with Kendrick. I was hugely influenced by him at the time of Section 80, Good Kid, Mad City, and To Pimp a Butterfly. And I felt that, at the time I was enough of a fan of his that most, if not all of what he said felt like it resonated with my worldview. And over the years, I haven't felt that way as much. I think Kendrick has, grown in different directions in terms of his perspective, as we all do. I've grown in my own individual direction. I've become a much more sort of politically inclined person than most rappers. Most rappers are not very politically inclined. And that is actually my main critique with hip-hop. It's not so much about the culture or the drugs or the partying music. I'm kind of okay with all of that. Or, I just don't. I've made my peace with it. In some cases, I enjoy it. But for me, it feels like where we need quote-unquote consciousness in terms of rappers is not so much on the, telling kids not to do drugs, although that's great, but kids don't tend to listen when you tell them not to do drugs. I'm more interested in rappers speaking to some of the political narratives that have kind of taken hold of our culture over the last 10 years or so, and trying to chart a better path forward ideologically, not just for rappers, but for listeners, for people of all kinds. And I don't think rappers have done a very good job of that. And I think most of the rappers that are more outspoken politically are rather right-wing. Or the ones that are outspoken politically, you could say somebody like Talib Kweli, maybe even Killer Mike. It doesn't come through so much in the music. It's more about things that are said outside of the music. And you don't get a lot of rappers who really apply their political thought to lyricism. And the ones that do actually kind of lean in more of a right-wing direction, in my view. Or at least you have sort of a cropping up of that type of thing in recent years. And I think that's because of a willingness on the part of right-wing actors and right-wing influence networks to utilize hip-hop and utilize hip-hop artists very cynically. And so that has led to them beating the more honest actors within the hip-hop culture to the punch, because people who might want to actually think about what they're saying, might want to make sure that they can stand on what they're saying, or recognize the weight of their words and want to get it right the first time, they may take a longer time to process things and sort of come to the point where they want to speak. And Kendrick strikes me as that type of artist. He has been moderately political in some ways. It really depends on what you define as political, because when it comes to sort of like racial and social issues, Kendrick's very outspoken, and he's had some pretty crystal clear commentary over the years, a lot of which I've appreciated. All Right, was a very culturally impactful song. I really loved when he used Fox News's clip that they made about him, and he interpolated that into a song and blasted back at them. That's the kind of stuff I like to see, because it's directly addressing the political discourse. It's not sort of trying to engage with this vague idea of them or they, what they are doing to us, which is the easiest route to go. And I'm guilty of it as well, because a lot of times when you're writing, it's easier to say they than it is to say exactly who you're talking about. But the more clear you make it to your listener who you're talking about, the more clear of a worldview you're starting to actually build. And I think a lot of rappers, not so much Kendrick, are guilty of kind of playing into the they type of rhetoric. And it just doesn't, it might hit. What it does is it makes the message more universal, but it doesn't really get to the core of what some of these issues are. You're not talking about inequality. You might be talking about racial inequality, but you're not talking about the architects of racial inequality, etc. So Kendrick, I think, has made progress when it comes to that over the years. He strikes me as the type of artist who wants to do that. He wants to speak directly to these issues. He wants to be as clear about it as he can, but he also sort of views himself as a vessel of God. So he's not so much speaking from, you could say, like a scholarly perspective or like a discourse perspective, wanting to influence the discourse and influence the sort of rhetoric and the political arguments that people make. He speaks more from a perspective of wanting to channel the light and the wisdom of God into music and into our culture, which is great. I commend him for that, and I think that is him at his best. But my critique for it is that I think it lacks the type of focus that I want to see when it comes to cultural commentary. And so while Kendrick has been dialing in on that a little bit more, in the case of that song he put out, Watch the Party Die, or some of the songs on this album where he's talking about the actions of people in the culture. He's talking about the ways that people in hip-hop culture and beyond are behaving that he finds unacceptable. And he's also saying that people need to do something about it, right? That like some of this sort of territorial energy that people apply to the streets and various conflicts of that sort, gang violence, etc. He's saying that type of energy needs to be applied to people who are not taking the culture seriously, bringing the culture down, mocking the culture, mocking black people, etc. And that's a message I fully agree with. The militancy of it and the unapologetic nature of saying that there are certain things that you can't just let slide in the name of balanced discourse. He had a line about how, you can't let a white comedian diss on a black woman. That's law. Got to slide on all of them, regardless of who's in the room, etc. And that is, it's very incisive. And look, I'm not saying that I agree with like acts of violence against anybody, but I like the unapologetic nature of saying that some things, while everybody has their protected free speech, you know, your free speech protections don't protect you from me. They don't protect you from people who are going to say that what you're saying is actually entirely noxious to the culture, and we need to put a stop to it. And this is the type of energy that punk music had back in the 80s when, you know, there were Nazi groups and various white supremacist and bigoted groups that wanted to appropriate punk culture, and they wanted to take up space within that world. And the punks who were not on that Nazi white supremacist shit, they recognized that it was their responsibility to not allow that. Whether that meant starting fights with people, sometimes losing fights with people, but more often winning fights with people because ultimately they had the strength of the culture on their side. And so, for the most part, Nazis were effectively outcasted from punk culture. And that is, I think it's effective. And it has led to the overall perception of punk culture in the general society as being anti-Nazi, anti-racist, because that's what they are. And in order to uphold those ideals, you have to fight for it. You can't just allow people to take up space in your culture, spewing bigoted things, whether it's bigoted things about black people, black women, gay people, women in general. These are the type of things that people need to be shamed for saying out loud. And that is simply not a matter of free speech. It has nothing to do with free speech, because free speech is about whether the government is going to come for you if you say a certain thing. But I'm not the government. I'm somebody who appreciates hip-hop, and I respect hip-hop. And so if I truly respect hip-hop, then I have a responsibility to not let people denigrate the culture and play in my face. And so I think that means a different thing for me than it does for Kendrick. We have different perspectives. I'm a white man, he's a black man. And while I wish there were more people in hip-hop who loudly and outspokenly embodied the sort of anti-racist, you know, anti-bigotry and explicitly left-wing perspective that I embody, I also recognize that, you know, being left-wing necessarily is not a requirement for being in hip-hop. It's not a qualifier. And so there are many people in hip-hop who don't really identify with any ideology. They don't identify with any political party. And that's their right. But I think as a consequence of that, hip-hop as a culture has slid to the right, just as most of our culture has been sliding to the right. A lot of people haven't noticed it yet, but they're going to start to pick up on it. And I think during this next Trump term, we're going to hear it from a lot of rappers as well. We're going to notice more right-wing talk. And we're going to notice that they're going to go along with a lot of the things that Trump is saying and doing. And I think one of the real tests is going to be these mass deportations when they start happening, if they start happening, and if Trump is going to put tanks on the streets of American cities for the purpose of extracting immigrants and deploy the military on American soil to round up immigrants. You know, the question of what is our entire culture going to do about that, in my mind, lingers in the air. But I think in hip-hop, it's really important for us to ask that as well, because I think one of the things that's really empowered hip-hop over the years is specifically racial solidarity, minority racial solidarity, people that recognize that they are boxed out of the sort of, you know, white supremacist order that American was built on, and recognizing that they have to build a culture outside that. It's a form of dual power. And hip-hop, at least on the underground side, has thrived on that for a long time. Because you have your more commercial aspects of hip-hop as well. But, you know, when it comes to the real heart and soul of the culture, there's solidarity there. And you saw that after Trump's first win, when YG and Nipsey Hussle did the Fuck Donald Trump song, And Nipsey Hussle's whole verse on that song was dedicated to defending Mexican immigrants and saying, these are the people in my community. These are my friends. You know, these are the people who have helped me build my community, and I love them, and I don't love you because you're coming after them. Fuck you. And so I think a major indicator of how far our country and how far the culture of hip hop has drifted to the right is going to be, how do we respond if people really start coming for these immigrants, whether they're illegal or whether they're not, or whether they're technically illegal or whether they're technically legal. But I don't care. I don't give a fuck about any of that, because in my opinion, hip hop as a whole, whether you're white, whether you're black, whether you're a man, whether you're a woman, whoever the fuck you are, you have a responsibility to fight against that, because that's the whole fucking reason hip hop is here. Because America is a place where there are many races that exist, regardless of how the people at the top of the white supremacist order happen to feel about that. The people at the top of that order don't want black people to have a voice. They don't want Mexican immigrants to have a voice. But hip hop is a place where they do have a voice, and they can be as militant as they want. And that's what Kendrick is reestablishing right now, that hip hop is militant, and it should be militant. There's many things to be militant about, and it's not wokeness, okay? Wokeness is the militants, and it should be. We should be woke. To be woke is to be militant. And I take Kendrick for somebody who understands that, but I can't say that for sure unless I hear him speak specifically to that language. I've never heard a rapper try to dismantle this idea of wokeness as like a boogeyman. I've never heard a rapper address that. It's an important topic, because all of these things that we've been fighting for, equality on all of these different vectors of our society, and progress that has been made in those places is being pushed back against under this guise of, all of that is woke. This is all wokeness gone too far. All this human rights stuff that you guys keep talking about, rights for transgender people, rights for black people, rights for women, that's all woke. And we need to pull it back with the woke shit. And in my view, that's the opposite of what hip hop's all about. And so while I share in Kendrick's motivation to see a more militant version of hip hop that pushes back on the things that seek to appropriate it for evil and for greed and capital, I also think that there needs to be a more specific addressing of the language and the political rhetoric and narratives that are being used by those powerful people who want to appropriate hip-hop. I've been talking about it for years. The conservatives, politicians in general, but definitely conservatives and people on the right, they want to appropriate hip-hop as much as they can, because hip-hop is cultural currency. If they can use rappers to make right-wing ideology seem cool, then that's just another cultural victory for them. And that's all they see it as. They don't give a fuck about rap. They don't give a fuck about hip-hop. They just see it as a way to spread their message. And if they can indoctrinate people through casual barbershop conversations or sort of like manufactured narratives about how Trump is responsible for these stimulus checks that people got, they're going to try to use that as a way to try to legitimize their ultimately bigoted ideas. And while I've said it before, a lot of minority groups sort of broke for Trump more than they have for Republicans in recent years, black people didn't as much. Black people seem to have maintained their ground when it comes to recognizing that Republicans as a whole, but certainly Donald Trump, are racist. And so if we don't want those racists to continue to gain ground within a culture that means a lot to us and ultimately stands as a bastion of anti-racism, then we need to claim that ground back. And we need to make it clear to these racists or people espousing racist rhetoric, whether they're white or black or Mexican or Latino or whatever they are. We need to make it clear to them that that shit doesn't belong in hip hop. And Kendrick seems to have been finding that message within himself, although it just seems focused in a different place. It seems focused more on people that are, I don't know, unserious or, you know, lying about their lifestyle, you know, fake gang shit or whatever. I guess that's my issue, is that while I agree with the militant energy that's coming from Kendrick, I think the reason people are more so identifying it as quote unquote being a hater is because he's not really pointing specifically to a critique of the culture that he wants to focus on. And so I think he is successfully putting people on notice with this messaging that he's putting out there. I don't think that it's in a focused enough way. And I don't know if Kendrick is on the left. He's pretty opaque when it comes to his politics. You know, he speaks a little bit of that kind of like Hotep-ish type of language, sort of Black Israelite kind of language sometimes. But then he'll have strikingly progressive and empathetic messages on his albums as well, like Auntie Diaries. But he seems like a person who's committed to fighting racism and for fighting for the future of black people, and in that way, the future of America. Kendrick seems to be finding himself in a more militant position when it comes to how to get there. And I agree with that. I applaud that. But in my opinion, if we're going to get there, we have to be militant against what we see happening in our culture right now, which is the cultural takeover of the right wing. And that, I assure you, is completely incompatible with an equitable future for America, whether you're a rapper or anything else. So that's where I think our focus should be.